So, the Patriotic Guard was formed in 1968 after the 21st of August Bucharest speech, through which Romanian Communist Party General Secretary, State Council, and President Nicolae Ceausescu condemned the suppression of the Prague Spring by the Soviet and the Warsaw Pact forces. Ceausescu appealed to anti-Sovietism within the general population to ask for resistance against the perceived threat of a similar Soviet invasion against Romania itself. The nationalists seemed news and their immediate effect in rallying large portions of the population, who began to organize and arming themselves under the direction of the Romanian Communist Party, or the Parti de Comuniste de Romani, or the Roman. So although the threat was over by the end of the year, the Patriotic Guard remained a feature of the Republic's communist structure, became a permanent addition to the regular army, and compulsory training was introduced for young men and young women. For university students, this meant that hours of the curriculum were reserved for shooting drills and other training courses. Soon, they were doubled by additional requirements for work in the fields that also included and was also asked by high schoolers and middle schoolers. And we have like primary and secondary schools. I don't know how that works, but 8 to 12-year-olds as well. But I guess that is middle school, right? As well as their teachers. No longer backed by the enthusiasm they had since the early 1970s, the Patriotic Guard nevertheless were the baseline of defense against projected invasions. The threat posed by the latter seemed to increase as the regime plunged into isolation, especially after the loss of the support for the Western Bloc in the mid-1980s. From that point on, the Patriotic Guard were to become part of the state's apparatus of repressing against its own people. During the Romanian Revolution of December 1989 Christmas Day, Ceausescu attempted to use them against the protesters, notably in Timișoara. However, the pace of events and the brevity of hostilities to his regime outstripped his plans. As the revolution progressed, many Patriotic Guard members, who like most other Romanians were fed up with Ceausescu's failed economic policies and suffering from declining living standards, actually joined the protesters themselves. To no small extent and irony, the people who were meant to be armed in case of disturbances were in fact the ones causing the disturbance. The Patriotic Guards were an all-inclusive public security organization. Its functions included normal civilian policing and even firefighting, and a very large people's militia force. During wartime, it would provide rear echelon services and security, would augment the ground forces and operate as guerrillas if their areas were overrun by the invaders. So in the 1980s, Romanian communism took on a militarized form. Ilie Ceausescu, general of the Romanian People's Army, and brother to Nicolae Ceausescu, obviously, summarized the traits in his Istorie Militară e Populară de Roman, or the military history of the Romanian people. The work, soon turned into the official dogma of the Patriotic Guard, argued that the Romanians had always had the longest standing army in the world. Notably, he consistently chose to add up the entire populations and present them under arms. This constituted a message of the future, since the regime had established a strong connection with all of its past forms, yes, including the World War II on both sides of the Axis and Allies. So, Vlad, Imperial, kind of fascist for a minute, communist, but under the other guy, and communist under Nicolae. So, as such, the ideology behind the formation of the Patriotic Guard was rendered as the war of the entire people's military doctrine, inspired by the Yugoslav Total's People Defense Doctrine, which is funny because they didn't really like the Yugoslavs. Cold War Tito split. So the Patriotic Guard was staffed by 700,000 citizens by 1989, both men and women. In keeping with the doctrine of the war of the entire people, the Patriotic Guard were a combined territorial defense or a national guard and a civil defense organization, which was established immediately after the Soviet-led Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia. The Patriotic Guard worked closely with the Ministry of National Defense, but was directly subordinate to the PRC and its youth organizations. So it was basically the apparatus of the party. So like the PLA, the Patriotic Guard was not an army, but the army of the party. Not the people, but the party. So relying on the ordinary citizens rather than the professional military. The Patriotic Guard served as a potential counterweight or a check to the power and the influence of the regular armed forces. I don't know how they're gonna defeat tanks and jets and watercraft, but they're gonna do stuff. So in 1989, the Patriotic Guard was organized into a company and a platoon-sized units in almost every judet, municipality, town, village, and or industrial and agricultural enterprise and complex. So under the command of the first secretary of the local PRC apparatus, they conducted basic and even refreshing training in small arms handling, demolitions, mortar and grenade launcher firing, and even small unit tactics, and by proxy, big unit tactics, perhaps. So in wartime, they had a responsibility for local anti-aircraft defense, providing early warnings for air attacks as well, defending popular centers and important elements of national infrastructure, and conducting civil engineering works as needed to reestablish essential military production after an attack. They would also recounter and attack enemy flanks and even rear end echelon troops, combat airborne units, and special forces penetrating deep into Romania. And obviously mount resistance operations against occupying forces. In keeping with the guerrilla image, the Patriotic Guard wore plain uniforms with no insignia or badge of rank. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for you. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. Was it a bit quicker? Probably so. But we're just testing out stuff, okay? But hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. It was pretty good. I like it. But we'll try again one more time, and we'll at least pump up one thing. Even if it's not the best, we gotta try. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time. And the Danube speaks Romani. It was the best thing I could come up with. Anyway, when you're invading Romania, just remember that the Danube speaks Roman. Learn something. Not Roman as in Italian, but Roman as Romani. Not the Romani people, but Romanians. Anyway, learn something.